Hey Refinery, this is week 3 of our Discern series. In this series, we are looking at how we interact with the world around us, how we discern culture and media around us, the messages that we are inundated on a daily basis. Now, I hope you've come to see the importance of discerning media, that there's messages there that we don't even realize it. And I hope you put into place some of these important practices that we've talked about. The steps of discover, discern, and decide. And I hope you're all starting to take it serious. You may still say, Ryan, you are crazy. I can watch, I can listen, I can play any video game, like I can do anything. There is freedom in that. And I absolutely believe there is freedom in that. But is it the wisest choice? Is it the best choice for the sake of the gospel? You know, because these messages are real. These messages do affect us. These ideas and concepts do change how we view the world. If you don't believe me, let me tell you a story about the De Beers family. They own a majority of the diamond mining. And back in the day, they went to Hollywood and they changed the world with one ad campaign. This ad campaign, they went to Hollywood and they said, anytime you ever see an engagement, it has to be a diamond ring. And they paid big bucks for this. And it's paid for itself over and over because it changed the world. It changed the culture. It changed what we believe to be the engagement ring. Because contrary to what you see in movies and TV shows, when a person would say, oh, this has been passed down by generation, this is my great-great-grandma's diamond engagement ring, that is a lie. Because most likely that engagement ring was maybe even just gold, or maybe it was, if it had a stone, maybe it was a ruby or a sapphire or an emerald or something. It wasn't necessarily diamonds until they paid Hollywood to say, hey, it's always got to be a diamond. When I heard that story, I realized that advertising, how movies, how TV shows can change how we see the world around us. And this step this week that we're going to deal with is the step of discerning. This is the meat of it. This is the process where we compare truth, God's truth, the truth, to what world says is true. Now, I watched a show called Gold Rush. And in Gold Rush, you know, they take the dirt and they pan for gold, right? And they start washing it, like they put water in it and they let all the gold all like sits down at the bottom and all the dirt goes out. And they're just left with gold right at the end. Or that's the hope. But how do they know that's gold? And they compare it to real gold, right? They don't want to be fooled by fool's gold. And so to find those little nuggets of truth, you need to understand that that is gold. And not just something fake. We have to do that with the world around us. So let's dive into God's Word. Today we're going to be in Daniel 3. So we're going to give you an opportunity right now to pause the video and read Daniel chapter 3. So this is the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, right? This is the story that they're thrown into the furnace and we know that they're safe. There's even 4 people in there. It's a pre-incarnate Jesus. But I want to kind of rewind and look back at that decision that those 3 guys made. Because they were students of God's Word. They understood God's Word flawlessly, right? Or, you know, to their best ability. And they understood Babylonian culture because they were the best of the class. They surpassed the understanding of those born in Babylon. When Nebuchadnezzar made the edict of you have to bow down to the statue, to the idol, when you hear the instruments play, these 3 guys didn't. And the people around them started to see that. They went to the king and they're like, hey, Nebuchadnezzar, like, come on over here. Like, those three guys that you promoted above us, even though we're from here, they're not bowing down to you. When he heard that, he went to them and he's like, hey, you understand our culture. You understand, our people. And their response is fantastic. Let's look at their response. They say, hey, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. How bold is that statement? We don't need to defend our reasoning. We don't need to defend why we're not bowing down to your idol. And it goes, if we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it. And he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Now they discerned the culture. They understood what that meant. They discerned and compared to what King Nebuchadnezzar was holding himself up as a god. But the three guys understood that they shouldn't worship anything besides God. So they looked at that first commandment and they looked at what Nebuchadnezzar was saying and they're like, nope, easy decision. And they discerned that, right? They understood, and they probably wore Babylonian clothes. They hung out with Babylonian people. They played probably Babylonian games. But when it came down to it, they knew where the line was. They knew worshiping a Babylonian king would go against worshiping the King of Kings. Now I want to give us some warnings before we dive into this a little deeper. First warning is that it is extremely important that you are in God's Word. We need to understand the truth in order to identify the lies. The example that's often used is the person who studies or identifies counterfeit dollar bills. They don't study counterfeits. They don't study the practices that people do to counterfeit the dollar bill. What they do is they study every aspect, every tiny piece of the dollar bill, and they understand it better than the back of their hand. They understand it better than anything else, so that when they are faced with counterfeits, it's incredibly easy for them to say, hey, this is a counterfeit. So we need to understand God's Word so that when we are panning for gold, it's not that we have to compare it and we have to put it in some sort of device to figure out if it's gold or not. We have God's Word to identify the truth. Second thing I want you to warn you about is that we're given these ratings, right? We're given TV ratings, movie ratings, video game ratings. And for various reasons, right? Whether it's for language, violence, adult contact, drugs, sex or anything like that, right? But I want to let you know that those ratings are not ratings given by God. That those ratings are a false security, if anything. There's plenty of movies and TV shows that are G or PG that probably aren't the most uplifting, God-honoring movies, right? The next thing is I want to warn you about this age of discernment. That the goal of those ratings is to understand the fact that at certain ages you're able to understand the difference between right and wrong. You're able to understand the difference or the value of human life. You're able to understand all this, right? And your parents are an excellent opportunity. In fact, they are the opportunity for you to understand, hey, is this appropriate for me? Because they know you, they know the movie, the TV show, they know how it's going to be. And I understand as a kid, you're like, hey, Mom, Dad, I know. But I want to tell you something, the show Full House, it's a wholesome show for the most part, right? My kids have been addicted to it and they've watched it all the time. But there's the littlest one, Michelle, she has this phrase that she says, "How rude," right? And so, or no, I think that might be Stephanie. I don't know. I get them mixed up. But the idea is that first time that Lydia looked at me when I was disciplining her, it had nothing. We weren't watching Full House at the time, but she looked at me and she went, "How rude." And oh man, God had to step in, because it just ticked me off that my daughter would talk back to me. Now, Full House is a fine show, but Lydia's at an age where she just hears something and she says it, right? My parents didn't let me watch The Simpsons because they didn't want me to say the various things that Bart Simpson said. Imagine if I told my mom when she was disciplining me, "Hey mom, eat my shorts." You wouldn't have a youth pastor, because I would be dead. Like, there would be no doubt about it. Like, she would whoop my butt for that, right? I want to let you know that your parents know content really well, that they have what is it best for you in their minds, right? You might be thinking, well, I'm just going to watch this movie. I'm just going to play this video game. My parents don't know about it. But I'm telling you, your parents have your best interest at heart. Now, part of that is this idea of desensitizing. And that's my last warning for you right now, is the more we watch, the more desensitized we are. This happens in video games as well. In movies, in songs, like the more you hear language that doesn't honor God, the more you're desensitized towards it. I have a friend that has been watching Mandalorian with his child that's about the age between Moses and Hadassah, and he said that, the first 2 episodes of season 2, his son was terrified, obviously because there's spiders in season 2, right? But there's blasters and all this stuff, right? But by the time that it hit the last episode of the season, his son was jumping around, pretending to shoot people and doing all of the crazy stuff, right? And he kind of identified, like, hey, how much has my son changed just over these 11 episodes of the show, right? He was desensitized towards this violence. And that is the case for us. The more we see it, the more we're okay with it. And we forget to ask the question, is it really something that we should be filling our minds with? So what do we do? In Gold Rush, they first do a pilot. They check one pan and they see if the dirt's okay. If there's a certain amount of color, they can kind of extrapolate how much gold there's in the dirt, right? But the most accurate is when they drill and they get a core sample. They bring a third party in that drills a hole and brings it up, and they pan that gold, right? Pan that dirt and see if there's any gold. And then that third party person would tell, in the case of Gold Rush, would say to Parker, like, hey dude, this isn't enough for you to mine, right? There is a lot of tools, and I'm going to put them in the description. I'm going to put them on Slack. There's tools like Plugged In that identifies all sorts of, it does music, movies, video games, identifies issues that may be in it, and helps understand if this is even worth mining for gold. There's other things like, your youth pastor, me, right? Your youth leader, parents. Those are third-party investigators. They're the core samples that, oh, dude, I wouldn't watch that show, or I wouldn't watch that movie. Like, that might be not good for you, right? Because I don't think we should put our heads in the sand and not engage culture, but I also don't think we just mine everything, because we're not going to find gold in some places. We need to compare it to God's word. We need to understand that we're anchored into God's word so that we can understand what is coming forward. So now moving forward, I'm going to share a video clip. I want us to analyze this. I'm not at all promoting the show. This is a horrible show. Sometimes, if I only showed shows that showed good things or showed music videos that showed good things, we're not really discerning, are we? And so this is a show that I do not recommend watching. It deals with adult content that isn't good, but it's Mad Men, and it's a show that about advertisers and how they sell things to people, right? And this specific clip is he's figuring out how to sell cigarettes when people are realizing that cigarettes cause cancer and cause death, right? So how do you sell something that you know that the consumer knows isn't good for them? He uses happiness. And I want you to as a group, I'm going to give you some verses that talk about joy, talk about happiness. I want you to compare God's joy to the happiness that Don Draper has, that he's trying to sell. Because there's no doubt that advertisers are trying to sell what Don Draper was trying to sell. And we need to discern this. We need to understand God's joy and compare it to happiness that this world thinks we need. So, to give you an example, here's the clip, but we'll see you guys next week.
Advertising is based on one thing: happiness. And you know what happiness is? Happiness is the smell of a new car. It's freedom from fear. It's a billboard on the side of the road that screams with reassurance that whatever you're doing, it's okay. You are okay.